It's a big world out there. Welcome to Bigfoot's Wilderness Podcast.
Welcome to Bigfoot's Wilderness Podcast, episode number 2. That's right, number 2. We're still in our infancy mode. I've got a great interview that we'll jump into in just a minute. But first, I've received an interesting voicemail about an encounter with a bit of a twist.
Hi, this is Chex. I got a story from Catoctin Mountains. I years ago used to go up to an old grotto up there. My father's buried there on the side of the hill. I'd go up there and say my prayers, and my father used to tell me up there on the mountain there was a creature. He said, don't ever go beyond the old graveyard. Don't ever go beyond the grotto there, the grotto cave, because there's something up on that mountain. And I listened to him. When he passed away, I'd go up there and remember him, pray a little bit. And, every once in a while I'd see that old bear he was talking about. There was a black bear up there. And you'd see him, especially on a fall day when the leaves were down. You'd see him up there in the creek or up on the side of the mountain. He's a black bear. He's good size. And, this particular day, I was up there. I was tired. I've been working all week, and I stopped by just to say hello, just to say my prayers, and kind of lost track of myself. I guess I had my eyes shut. Maybe I fell asleep. But when I opened them, right across the little creek there, that bear was standing there, and he was looking at me, and he had those eyes, the way a bear looks when it's hungry. And it was so close, there was nothing I could do to avoid him at that point. He was coming across, and there was really, if I'd have seen him sooner, I could have gotten out of there, but I wasn't going to get out of there. And he started coming across the creek. I stood up, and just at that moment, there was the loudest sound you ever heard, something I'd never heard before or since. And that bear not only stopped in his tracks, he just ran down the creek, down the middle of the creek, away from me, and disappeared. And he was only feet from me, really. As fast as he was moving. And made me think that the thing that my father told me about on that mountain was not the bear that I'd seen many times. It was not that hungry bear. Old bear, probably by that time, kind of bony, ugly.
I know what you're thinking. What happened next? Don't leave me hanging. Well, right after receiving the voicemail, it was followed up with a text message. Sorry, got cut off. That god-awful noise was an ear-piercing scream. My father told me there was a creature, and he said it guarded the grotto and the graveyard. I always thought it was a bear, but after what he told me, I believe it was something else, a Bigfoot. If I understand this right, a search online indicated that the grotto in the Catoctin Mountains was most likely the grotto of Our Lady of Lourdes. In the past few years, I've actually received a few reports from Frederick County, Maryland. I recall one couple owning a farm in which they harvested apples. It seems Bigfoot likes lots and lots of apples. All right. Next up, I've got a great interview with a gentleman I met last year at a Bigfoot conference. Anthony shared some stories, and I'd hoped to get him on the channel months ago, but like everything, life got in the way. But recently, we made contact, and I know you're going to enjoy his experiences. He spent quite a bit of time in the field and had the great opportunity to investigate areas alongside the renowned and unfortunately late William Dranginis. I'll include a link in the show notes on an article about William Dranginis in case you don't know who he is. And now, let me introduce Anthony. So, Anthony, how are you?
I'm getting better. Still recovering from surgery, even though it's been over a year for one surgery and almost a year for the second one. But thank God I'm getting better.
Well, that's good to hear. So, thanks for joining me on here. I know we talked briefly at the Bigfoot conference we went to in Waynesboro, Virginia, and I was hoping I would hear from you again. And we did chat a little, but those stories you told me were incredible, and I think that people who listen to this podcast will really enjoy them. So, without further ado, why don't you go ahead and share with us what you've encountered?
Well, because I recently talked to you about my daughter, I'd like to talk about an encounter with her. This happened, this was in 2014. It was about June 2014. And this was at the home that I used to live in. And we had just bought the home in 2013. And it was shortly after buying the home that I was hearing the same vocalizations that I was hearing prior to moving there. Because again, I'm not talking about my first experience. I'm just talking about, this was, I got involved in about 2010, had my first encounter in 2011. So here it is, 2014. Now I'm having an encounter with one of my children. And when we had a home that was at the end of a dirt road. We had a creek at the edge of the property. We had a shed. There was a shed that we used that didn't belong to us, but the neighbor allowed us to use it because it was literally right on the property line, and they weren't using it, and they let us make use of it. And one night when we were coming home, it was just my daughter and I, and no one else had come home yet. And we started hearing the calls, and I was familiar with these vocals that we were hearing, these calls that they were making, and I never shared with any of my children what this was. And at that time she was about 11 years old, and so she was enjoying listening to these calls because she started to notice that they were getting closer and closer. And so she joked around and said, well, why don't you call back? And I said, I'm like, well, if I call back, that might bring them real close. And, and kind of like all kids that are interested, she was like, well, let's go ahead and do it. And so I tried as best as I could, to mimic some of the calls that, like the way that they were shouting. And I was shouting back. And to our surprise is the responses were getting louder and louder, which made us think that they were coming closer. And then all of a sudden, the responses had just stopped. And we just kept kind of like looking, we were kind of hearing some noises, and, we were looking in the direction where we were hearing the noises. We could tell that they were coming from behind the shed. The shed had a little overhang where I had my riding mower parked. I have a tractor style riding mower. And so, we're kind of like looking, and I couldn't see much because we have a dusk to dawn light, and, it was shining at an angle on my eyes, but I was casting, a little shadow on her, and she was able to see that something was in the bushes behind the shed, and that it had jumped out. It had jumped back into the bushes where it couldn't be seen. And she said, I've seen it right there. And then it jumped out. It jumped back in. And she saw it very quickly because, as she's seeing it, I'm turning my head and looking in a different direction. And then I'm like, where did you see it? Where did you see it? And she's like, it was right there. It was right there. It was right behind it. Right. She said she was trying to give me directions exactly where to look. She was like, it's right there behind the shed. And it had jumped out. And then this time, the creature had stood up. And as soon as it stood up, her eyebrows raised, is probably the highest I've ever seen them. And then she's like, "Oh my God!" And now she wasn't entertained anymore. Now she was filled with fright, and she got down on all fours, okay, and started crawling away. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "I don't." She was in fear for her life, And I never seen my children act like this, or my child act like this. And so she's crawling away. And I said, honey, look, you please relax. Nothing's going to happen to us, because if something was going to happen to us, it would have happened already. And it took quite a bit to get her off the ground, because she just wanted to crawl back to the house and never come out. And I said, look, honey, we have to, I try to grab her and said, look, we got to try to be brave. Our home is right here, but their home is right there, and we got to try to coexist, because if they're, they're just like any other animal that's out there, as long as they're out there, we shouldn't have to be in fear where we are. And but she didn't want to stay. She later on, she was very, very upset that I made her do that. And but as she was looking and staring, and I needed to give her a break, and I said, I'll tell you what, go get my flashlight. And I had a big mag light, okay. And I don't know why, of all days, I always keep good batteries in my mag light, but the day that I need the mag light, it comes, the batteries are dead. I couldn't figure it out. And so I couldn't, so I had a 2-cell, and it was a 4-cell flashlight. I asked to go get this spare 2-cell, 2D cell flashlight, and she got it for me. And even with that little 2-cell flashlight, we were able to flash it and get a little bit of eye shine on where this creature was standing behind the shed. Now, for some reason, she was successful. Anytime that I was trying to look at the creature, I couldn't see it. Okay. But when she was looking at the creature, it would either open its eyes or reappear or whatever. And she was seeing it, and she was saying it. I mean, we were there for several minutes. It was standing behind the overhang. Okay. And the overhang had a little pitch to it, and so in the center of it, okay, was about 8 feet. It's about 8 feet to the ground, okay. And what I will do as soon as I can find it, I will email you the picture that she had drawn for me as a little girl, and because the way this thing was huge. This thing was huge. It was standing up behind the overhang, and it had one arm kind of like at the end of the overhang, the other arm at the other end of the shed. And when I show you the picture, you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. But we just kind of looked at it, and my wife was, well, soon, now going to be my ex-wife, but she was coming home, and that's when it disappeared. Not vanished into thin air. That's just when it went right back into the tree line, and you didn't hear anything afterwards. And she went back in the house, and she did not want to come back out at all. She was, it took a while. It took about 2 months before they set up tents out there again, so they could sleep overnight. But the next day we went out there, and with her standing in the same exact spot, we tried to gauge where the eye shine was, and I got up on the ladder and using a stick and measuring tape later on, trying to figure out how kind of like exactly where she saw the eyes, and and with the spot that she was comfortable with. The eyes I measured were 11.5 feet in the air. Okay, from right where the head was standing. The head just happened to be right in the middle of the overhang, and I mean, this thing was huge. Okay, I have casted footprints in the area, and this is just my guess. I don't think that the footprints that I've casted were of that particular one that we saw, because I've seen smaller footprints and I've seen larger footprints in the area. I've also casted a footprint which I think is kind of unique, because when I casted the footprint, it looked like there was a much smaller footprint inside the larger footprint. So when I pulled the cast out, it looks like there was a smaller foot, that kind of like if you and I were walking through the snow and we have a smaller child coming, following in our footsteps so that they could walk easier through the snow. So, but that, to me, that's what it looks like. It's been a while since we talked about that, so please forgive me if I already sent it to you. I'm talking about it right now. But,
no, not a problem.
But that, yeah. So
you ever heard of something called there's a Bigfoot height weight ratio out there. There's a scale, and if you, I can't say for gospel exactly the height and weight, but I think something 11.5 feet tall would have to be somewhere in the 16 to 17 inch foot range. That's just massive. Okay.
Well, this one here, I don't think is that. Hopefully, I'll be able to get that cast. I have pictures of it, but hopefully, I'll be able to physically get a hold of that cast again. But what I do have a picture of on a different location. This was on top of a mountain and this was not where I lived, but this happened to be in an area where I work. And one of the locations that our shop was responsible for, and this was in the snow, and I took a measuring tape out, and I saw some footprints in the snow, and I'll also email you a picture of this as well, where there was footprints in the snow, and I put my boot next to that footprint that was in the snow. My boot measured, I'm a size 10 in the work boot, but toe to heel, it measures about 12 inches. And this print looks like it's about 22 inches, the one that I had found in the snow. And I took a close-up picture. I'm going to see if I know I have that picture on my old cell phone. If I get my personal property back after the divorce, I'll be able to send you that close-up picture as well, because the close-up picture of that footprint in the snow kind of shows that it has a slight arch to the bottom of the foot, so so it's kind of, the toes are not well defined, but you definitely, because somebody walked, in it and then just kept snowing, but you can tell that this was a pretty large print.
Wow.
So I have no idea what a 20 or 22 inch creature, how tall or how heavy that would be. But this was up in a mountain in Virginia.
So all of these sightings that you've had, they all took place in Virginia, right?
Yes. So all of my experiences, from majority of my experiences have been in Virginia, with the exception of we had spoken about the Medoc Mountain State Park in North Carolina.
That's right.
So that'd be the only other place that I've had experience outside of Virginia. But most of my experiences in Virginia have been in several locations. I haven't traveled all over the state, like Bill Dranginis used to do, but there's a few places that Bill Dranginis and I have in common, where we had experiences. And
you and I know who he is, Bill Dranginis or Dranginis. You and I both know who he is, and I'm sure very few people do know who he is. So if you want to explain who he is, and if you want to speak of another encounter, feel free.
Sure. He had the Virginia Bigfoot research site. I mean, an experience that he had had, and he had also invented. I think he called it the I Gotcha game camera. So this was a game camera that had was triggered and took pictures that it wouldn't make any type of electrical noise, electrical interference, which he believed was a good reason why a lot of people are not catching them on the game camera. And he was able to get a lot of pretty, very, very good evidence. One of the things that he had captured on video was a mother and child, the mother and the juvenile, mother catching the juvenile, carrying a juvenile. The mother had put the away, and it looked like the mother was like to the juvenile, like hey, come on, let's go. And juvenile, like any other type, juvenile was probably not being obedient. Mother came and smacked him, and then I'm not sure if the juvenile started walking with mom at that point, or she just grabbed him, picked him up. I can't remember that part, but I know they went away together. Now there was an area of Virginia that in Dinwiddie County that he and I had shared experiences, and it was near a lake called Lake Chesden, and this coincidentally is the area where I've had my first experience, and I'll tell you where the first sighting that I had, and I'll tell you because there was new construction, for my company in that area, and so I had to be there quite frequently to make sure that the automation part of all the equipment there was working properly. And when I had drove down one day, I happened to see what I thought was a deer in the woods, and what caught my eye was why was this deer not running? And as I was, that made me drive slow. And as I was driving slow, then I started to realize, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that's not a deer. And right when I had that thought, the pair of legs to what I can see to my right jumped up on a log and then jumped over and disappeared. And then the other one just jumped up, kind of looked back at me, and then followed the other one and just was gone. And I'm like, I couldn't believe what I saw. And I got out and I walked towards where they had jumped over, thinking that I might be able to see them. And as I was getting close, I heard a very large, it was a tree knock. It was very loud and it was very close. And then I realized, if I go any further, they might not find me if something happens. So then I just backed off slowly. But I was just, really, really, excited after seeing that. And that was in, that was around 2011. And that was my first sighting. And that's what gave me the bug to continue looking, for these creatures and learning more about them.
So you were in the Lake Chesden area. I've been there myself, not maybe necessarily where you are or where you were, but very rural. And Interstate 85 runs through there. I mean, just woods everywhere. Did you, when you say you thought it was a deer, I'm guessing you thought it had the same colors per se as a deer, looked similar to a deer in color?
It looked, well, the first one that had jumped over was kind of brownish, so that's what made me think that it was a deer. But but then as I was moving closer, then I saw that the first pair of legs was brown, the second pair legs was black, and but they both weren't that tall. If I had to guess, maybe like 4 feet, 5 feet, I mean, from the distance that I was at, it didn't give me the appearance that these were tall, but they definitely didn't look like, I mean, it definitely was not a bear. I'll tell you that, I mean, and because the interesting thing is that the distance that they had jumped, from like to, as I saw them, as they jumped up from the log, I'm thinking that had to be like at least, even as small as it was, I think kind of what surprised me was the distance that they were able to jump. I mean, I had to say that, I mean, just from a standing position, it was like they just jumped. And to me, it was like, 15, 20 feet, they're on top of this log and then boom, then they're gone, And I mean, I think even on my best day, I don't even think I could jump that high or that far, So
Right.
it's a running start, And so, so the first one just, like I said, just jumped up and went over, and then the second one jumped up, looked back a little, and then gone, So in that particular area, Bill Dranginis also had some footage. He was helping someone in the area, actually trying to catch some disturbances that were taking place, and he had actual footage of a creature that was about 10 feet tall. I don't know if you've ever heard that about that footage that he had. I never saw it, but he did share that with me, that he did record something there that was that he estimated to be about 10 feet tall, because where the recording was, where the camera was, the recording camera was, it was over 10 feet in the air, and this thing was able to come close to the camera and look at it. So
Wow. So the camera was 10 feet up, and the Bigfoot was parallel to it.
yeah, pretty close to it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's a big boy, huh? Just like the 11 and a half and a 10 footer.
Yeah.
You typically, I get a lot of emails, and people will share their experiences, and sometimes I think I must be getting the smaller Bigfoot because I rarely get to hear of the ones that are 10, 11 feet tall, and I live in Virginia, so I definitely it's always shocking to think of something that big out there. I mean, if you've ever seen a bear, a brown bear, a black bear, they could get to be certain sizes, but boy, this is something, Kodiak bear sized. I mean, this is enormous.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And there was one occasion when I was in Buckingham County, and I was fishing at a neighbor's pond. And the reason why I'm talking about that, because it just sparked a memory about, speaking of size. I remember being at the pond, and I was not having a good day fishing, but I said, all right, just I'm by myself, and I said to me, I'm walking along the dam of the pond, and so I figured, all right, let me just go to a different location. And as I was walking, I heard something walking with me, and I thought that was very odd, because as I'm walking, I hear the thump, thump, thump sounds, and I'm like, what in the world is walking? And so I stopped and I took a look, and then the thumping sound stopped. And then I said, all right, let me keep going, because now I'm definitely not going to be fishing over here with something that big and heavy walking behind me. But I just calmly just started walking. And then that's when I noticed that my neighbor's dog, they were a distance away, but they, she had 3 long-haired collies, and they were barking like crazy. I mean, all of them were just barking, and they bark at pretty much anybody nearby. But one of the things that caught my eye is when I saw them in the distance, they weren't barking in my direction, so I knew they weren't barking at me. So I'm like, okay, they could see something that I can't. I said, I better get out of here. So, and as I was walking, the walking, the thumping sound started changing. It was going like thump, 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 but it was still walking parallel like I was walking, and I'm like, okay, if I have to make a break for it, I'm going to run as best as I can. I'm going to jump in with the dogs. I'm like, I could survive dog bites, but I don't know what this is behind me, So, but I didn't see anything. But I will say that if you're in the woods and you get to hear that heavy walking, it is very intimidating.
And sizable, most likely, right?
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
No lightweight's going to make a thumping sound.
No, not like that. Definitely not like that.
So I think when we, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say real quick. I think the equivalent sound. I mean, like if you ever picked up a big boulder and then just like dropped it on the ground. I mean, a huge boulder, as big as you can carry, and just everybody's picked. Most guys picked up something big and then just dropped it on the ground, and that thumping sound. That's what it sounds like. That's the only, or the equivalent to me, because like I said, it was a thump, thump, yeah, and then I could, as I'm walking, I could hear it's walking with me, and I'm like, okay, I don't want this thing walking with me, It's very,
I was just going to say
very
that
scary that day.
when you and I talked at the Bigfoot convention or conference, I think you mentioned to me, I think we talked about a story that I shared that was in Farmville, Virginia. And it was about a guy had sent me an encounter about being a delivery truck driver and going onto some property. And apparently there was a house that was empty. He was trying to deliver a package, and turned out there was something in the woods that was looking at him through the other side of the house. It was some sort of an A-frame type home, and he could see from one side to the other. Anyway, I occasionally travel to Farmville, and I have always, I'm always curious, and I'll drive down a rural road here and there. That is some of the areas around Farmville, which would be off of Route 60, very spooky little areas. But did you say that you recalled a sighting in that Farmville area, or I might be mistaken?
Well, there was, well, the funny thing is that there was one occasion in the Farmville, just south of the town in the ball field, where there's a few softball fields, and there is I think it's I want to say it's next to the fireman's arena there. I mean, there's a place where they rent out, where you could, there's a hall that you could rent out, and then next to that, there's some softball fields, and there's a homeschool group for a few months out of the year that they get together and they play softball out there. And one of the farther fields, there was a group of kids that had just started screaming loudly as they were watching the game, and everybody looked in that direction. And fortunately for me, one of those children was my youngest son, and he had mentioned that he saw what was looking at them. So he looked, and then there were other girls that were with him, okay, and they were the ones that did the screaming, and he was just like, hey, what is that thing? It was kind of cool. But when the girl screamed and everybody looked, he saw it turn and go away. And when you saw it go into the wooded area, you could clearly make out something big is moving in that direction. And so obviously, if everybody didn't see it, everybody's first thought is, oh, well, that must have been a bear. And I pulled my son to the side and I asked him, I said, what did you see? And he said, well, he said he saw it looking at us. He said he didn't see it for long because the girl screamed and everybody was like, what's going on? And then he said he just saw it turn away. He said, but he saw it go into the woods. And I said, can you describe to me how it went into the woods? He said, well, it got down on all fours. He says it was real skinny. It was black. And he said that he noticed that when it was like moving, he said it was like the shoulders, he was trying to, he was moving his shoulders like up and down, like he's like, and it was moving like that, And I said, well, son, I said, well, tell me, do you think it was a bear? I said, was it a bear? He says, oh no, I know what a bear looks like. He says, that didn't look like a bear. He said, it had a face like a person, but it was dark. So, but he said it wasn't a bear because he said the hair was like long and stringy, and it was kind of like, I get, he was trying to describe that, like when one arm had hit the ground, like the hair was, had, reacted to the thump, like when it hit the ground, So, but it all happened so fast, a few days later, I had borrowed a thermal camera just to see if there was anything in the area because it happened a second time. Okay.
Wow.
And so you may have heard other people say that, the sound of children attracts them. So that's that's my guess, but interesting thing is, you've been through Farmville, and it doesn't, in any direction, you're not far from being in a wooded area, whether you travel east, west, north, and south. And this was just a little south of the town, not really, not far from if you remember uh, um, where the schools are over there in Prince Edward. It's in the east direction. Yeah, you travel east from the school, keep going further east. That was where that sighting was, a little outside of Farmville in the Green Bay area. Um, there was an interesting encounter with a hunter that he was out there, and he had his turkey hood on. He was well camouflaged, and just like a lot of good old hunting buddies, they like to play jokes on each other, and so he hears somebody walking in the area, and so he's thinking, okay, I hear. Yeah, his first thought is, I hear my friend's coming, so he says, let me hide. So he hid, and as he hears what's walking closer down, he's starting to think there's something strange, because as this thing is walking and getting closer, he feels just a slight vibration, like something heavy is like, it almost feels like it's shaking the ground, he's thinking. Then it stopped, and then it just started walking again slowly. And mind you, he's covered, he's got a turkey hood on, he's not showing his face. And he said he approximated the creature to be about 8 feet tall. It was white, all white. It was walking in the bright daylight. Okay. And he couldn't believe what he was seeing. and now he was terrified, but he knew not to make a sound, not to move, and he probably wasn't even breathing. But he said he just looked at it walk away, and then he just didn't move. He said, probably for almost an hour. Yeah. So, but that
I must have been petrified.
He sure was. But this was, and if you've been through Farmville, you've probably seen the Green Bay Road. I know it was in the area of Green Bay, but it was. It's outside of Farmville and south. I've been probably about southeast of Farmville, where that particular encounter had taken place. So
Your timing of your call and us having this little conversation is pretty funny, because yesterday I took my son to High Bridge Trail State Park, and we did a nice little walk. Which have you ever been there before?
Yes, I have.
That's straight away on the train track, and
Mm-hmm.
I know my poor son, he probably thinks I'm crazy, but I was intently looking down in that ravine gorge area, looking at the Appomattox River, and
Right.
kind of just trying to see if I could see anything moving down there, any wildlife or anything like that. We heard a lot of frogs, but what a cool place, just really isolated. And I thought, wow, this would be an interesting place to see something unusual, but we didn't see anything. But it was a great hike.
Well, if you would make friends with some of the neighbors there, closest to the river there, they would share with you some very interesting experiences of some of the things that they hear in the evening, overnight hours. Okay, they have heard some howling that have taken place in that area that they just couldn't describe. They've heard some god awful screams, the way they described it, that they just couldn't identify what kind of creature would have made it.
Wow.
So yeah. But
sometimes I can say wow too many times, but I got to say that's just wow, because I sometimes just am surprised at the rural areas and what can be what information can be shared among friends, neighbors, contacts, like me talking to you, and just hearing all of these things. Because I saw one, I don't know if I've told you that, but I saw one in Greene County, which is north of Charlottesville.
okay.
And I found prints. I heard ape noises while I was changing my shoes in my car, and it was right behind me, and it had that reverberation, and I got the hair standing on the back of my neck when I
Yeah,
was I was going inside at night, and I just felt like there was something steps away from me, but I never heard steps, but I actually did get a visual. And in my opinion, I don't want to persuade you in any way. I thought it looked more towards an ape than it looked like a man. Apparently, you've had multiple sightings. I'm like, and as I keep hinting, you'll share more. But but I thought it seemed more like ape than man. But then again, other people say opposite. So that leads me to believe there are types. But I'm not gonna. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I said I agree with you that there are different types.
I think it has to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because some say that they look like apes, some say that they look human, some say that they look human from the waist up. When I can find it, I'll try to share the give it to you as well, because I think when you look at newspaper articles from the 1880s, and when newspapers back then are bold enough to print encounters like these, it kind of, to me, I think that would probably, to me, I think it's very credible. Okay. And that's just my opinion, and some people may or may not want to debate me with that. And I'm just saying, because, 1880s, you don't want, there was it's like today, it kind of feels like anything goes in the media, but back then, they're, very sensitive to ridicule, but there was an article where, there was a man getting upset because whenever he would leave his campsite, he would come back and the campsite was destroyed. And so he had set out to, find out who was doing this. And so he hid in the bushes and waited. And then, he said he waited for about 2 hours. And then finally, the person that came and destroyed his camp came out. And he said he could only describe it as what looked like a man in a gorilla costume. He said, but it wasn't a costume. He said, because from the head up, it looked like a man. He said, but the rest of him didn't look like it. And then he said, as he's looking at this thing, not, just, being careless around his campsite, he said he had made a call, and then he had realized, he said, that one called a female. He said this one had breasts that were kind of hanging, and so that's how he knew it was a female. And then but the female did not look like the male. The female looked, the face was darker and looked more ape-like. So is it a thing with male and females? I don't know, but that was just the report that I had read. It was from the 1880s, from an article from the 1880s. So, but I have to dig that up, and that's, I unfortunately that I have at the house, but like, I'm going through a divorce, unfortunately, and I don't have any of my personal property. So, but I hope to be able to give you detail on that encounter, and what newspaper I printed it as well. And if anybody who's listening knows what I'm talking about, please share it with Mike Singleton.
And that is a Virginia newspaper?
No, it wasn't a Virginia newspaper.
Oh, gotcha.
Mm-hmm. But
well, we got time for maybe one more you could share, and I'll tell you what I'll do in the very near future. I'll bring you back, and we'll talk some more.
Okay. Let me see. There was a time that I was in another county, in Cumberland County. There's a state park over there. You familiar with Bear Creek State Park?
Yep, I am. Yep, right off Route 60.
Okay. So there was a time when I had went by the lake, and I was also by the dam of that lake as well. And I was there with a good friend of mine, and actually he's kind of the one that put me on a crash course on how to look and shout for these creatures. And we were there one day, and he was calling, and it took about 30 minutes. But after about 30 minutes, they started responding to his calls, and they started coming closer and closer. Now, the funny part was that we were, I'm just going to describe it as, we were looking straight ahead, looking to the north. The responses were coming, I'm gonna assume north, and and it sounded like they were coming down the hill, and both of us were looking in one direction, but then I just happened to take a peek to the right, and I've seen the most massive creature. I couldn't gauge the size of this creature because, again, this is on the road, that's part of the dam, and at the edge of that road, I mean, it drops off quite a bit. Okay, so however tall this creature was, it was already 8, 9 feet above the road. Okay, so and there was, and like I said, when I couldn't gauge the I didn't know how deep it was in the dark, but I just know that there was no grass there. So and when I had looked at, it noticed that it had seen me, and I mean, and as quick as I saw it, it had dropped down, and I didn't even hear it go away, but when it dropped down, I ran over there with a flashlight real quick, trying to light up the area, and I mean, that thing was gone. I mean, even on all fours, I don't know which direction it went, but it was just gone. I couldn't see it wasn't there, So, and that was just amazing speed this thing has.
Did you get a color? Was it a particular color?
Oh, yes, very dark brown. It wasn't black, or because of the moonlight, it was either dark brown or black. But I'm going to assume it was dark brown because I've seen black before. Because when it's real black, it just looks like a really dark shadow in the night, But the brown, I don't know why. From what I've seen before, it kind of it kind of sticks out. It just sticks out a little, a little bit. I don't want to say a little bit better, but it just a little bit better. But in the moonlight, like I said, I would have to. My first guess would be just very dark brown.
So the last time I went there to Bear Creek Lake State Park, I went to I went past the ranger station and up the road, the opposite way from where you went. But isn't there another road that goes over the lake or on the edge of the lake where the dam is?
Yeah, this was the road which is right where the edge of the dam is, and I can't remember the name of that road, but I could describe it to you. So if you are traveling west on Route 60 and you are leaving the town, okay, there is a building supply company on the right, and then it's as soon as you pass that building supply company, it is that first right turn after you pass it, and you just keep driving straight, and that'll bring you right to it. It's a couple of miles in there,
right,
and you'll drive right on the dam. And we were on the other side of the dam. There's a spot there to drop your boats and stuff like that. So that was kind of the area where we were parked at.
What's funny is that state park has cabins for rent. So if you want to just take a little, take your family for a little weekend trip, and you can stay in a nice little, it's not a yurt, but it's an actual cabin with, two bedrooms and 2 little beds. And could you imagine if you spent a couple days there and if you learned how to call in a Bigfoot, that could be a pretty scary situation.
Well, it's interesting you say that because when those creatures were responding and they were coming closer, we saw some of those cabin lights turn on,
Ooh, wow.
Yeah. So so we kind of thought that, hey, either they know or they know now something is out there.
It's funny when you said your friend knew how to call them. That's one thing that people don't share is how they call them. And I'm not telling you to share it. I'm just saying it's, I've heard other people say that there is a way to call them in. And to me, that sounds like lighting a stick of dynamite. It sounds extremely dangerous, but at the same time, fascinating to know how to call one in. If in fact they are where you think they are.
Yeah. Well, like I said, he was the one that put me on a crash course because I met him in 2011, and I met him in the Lake Chesson area, and he was the one. And I'll just share this quickly because I know you got to watch the time there, but he has probably, not only he taught me very well, but I mean, he had some of the most interesting evidence I've ever seen. He had showed me one video when he was stumbling, where he had stumbled upon a raccoon that was just dropped on the road where he was traveling, and he was just parked and he was getting out to set up, but he just stopped. I don't know how close to where he was gonna park, but he's like, there's a raccoon just there on the road, and because this is a familiar area to him, he just said the raccoon got him interested. He just drove around it and got his camera out, and he just started, I mean, he filmed everything beginning to end, and so he got out and filmed it, and the raccoon, literally, like when you take a bite out of a sandwich, you could tell somebody took a bite out of a sandwich, and depending on the sandwich, you could even tell where the teeth marks are, and that's how this raccoon looked like. Something had took a bite out of its bottom, and you can see the where, like you could make out where the teeth were, and the entrails there were on the ground. They were kind of stretched out, and they were actually that particular part of the ground where the sandy part of the road, you could tell it was even dragged a little bit. Like it looked like something had just took a bite out of it, was probably eating it, saw him coming, dropped the raccoon and took off. But what in the world has a mouth like that, to take a bite out of the bottom of a raccoon, So it was interesting. Like I said, it was an interesting video. And with him, I don't, I think his hard drive had crashed, so I don't know if he was still able to retrieve that video or not. But the good news is I know who he is, and I gladly introduce you to him.
And he shared it with you, and it was a lasting memory.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh. That's great. Well, Anthony, thanks so much for your time, and we will make this a part 2, and I will contact you back, and we'll finish up. And I appreciate you sharing with me. Are you going to the next Bigfoot conference? And I think this one's going to be in Mount Crawford.
Yeah, it's not too far.
A little further up the road.
Yes, a little further up the road. I'm undecided at this time. I'm hoping I'll be able to make it, but I will let you know.
I will not have a table, but I will be walking around and shopping and listening to some speakers. So hopefully it'll be a fun time.
Yes, and I hope to see you there.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks again, and we will chat with you later.
All right. You're very welcome. You have a great night.
Thanks. Anthony mentioned something about pictures in our conversation, and I'll be sure to follow up with him and see if they're okay to post. Maybe we'll include them on episode number 3. All right, folks. Well, that does it for tonight's podcast. I sure hope you enjoyed it. Have a great night.